This video is brought to you by the Battle Zoo Bestiary, a new book featuring 100 award-winning monsters and the monster part system that allows players to harvest resources from their fallen foes and craft into custom gear. The Battle Zoo Bestiary is now available at battlezoo.com. The first topic that generated a lot of agreement that they wanted clarification in the community was about Druid's wild shape. And in particular, if you ever look at the write-up of Wild Shape, I think it's the very last sentence says that if you want to, you can use your unarmed attack bonus instead of the battle forms attack bonus, and if you do so, you get a +2 to your attack. And the area that wasn't really clear on that was, well, first of all, if we're talking unarmed attack and I'm wearing Hand Wraps of Mighty Blows, do I get to add that bonus when calculating my normal unarmed attack while I am polymorphed? So what's the response to that?
So when it comes to figuring out what your attack bonus is with a battle form, if you are taking the battle form's bonus, you just take it. There's only a few things that can add to that, such as status and circumstance bonuses, I believe. If you are using your own full bonus, then you first determine if you're going to use that bonus. If you do, you take the whole thing, and that will also include the item bonus. At that point, once you have determined that you are using your bonus, that is when you add the +2 bonus from Wild Shape for using your own bonus.
Okay, so you get to choose if you want to use your bonus or the battle forms bonus. It's not a situation where you have to have a higher bonus in order to take in order to not take the battle forms bonus.
Well, hold on that one. Let me see what it says in the spell. You do have to determine which one you're going to take first before receiving the +2, though. That is solid. So it says here, if your unarmed attack bonus is higher, you can use it instead. So you cannot use it if it is not higher.
Okay, so if your normal unarmed attack bonus is one less than what it would be for the battle form, you cannot get that +2 bonus and have a net of +1.
That is what it says right now.
Now, our second question is something that comes up in my games a lot, and that is moving an enemy in a direction other than away. So we've got shove that can move your enemy away from you, but if I just want to grab an enemy and move them into a different adjacent space, just push them aside, there doesn't seem to be a hard-coded rule to allow for that. So how do we do that within Pathfinder 2nd Edition?
All right, so there's not a basic tactic that just like anybody who has athletics at all can just automatically do that, like there is for shove or grapple. But what you can do is you can get a feat or ability that specifically determines how you move things, or you can improvise an action using the rules from the core rulebook about improvising actions to improvise exactly that action in the moment that you wanted to perform. And so that the core rulebook has some fairly robust guidelines to help you try to figure out what you're going to do for those. And then that way the GM and the player can take those by case basis. But if you have a feat or ability that gives a very specific, some kind of very specific movement that you can do, then of course you can always use that, and it's not a case by case. But it's never going to cover all of it, and you can always use the rules for improvised actions to figure out whether that particular movement works for you. Do keep in mind the rules on forced movement, that since it's not a direct shove, the GM always determines whether or not a movement is allowed. It does say that, but if it's not a direct shove, then in general you can't use it to like put someone into a really dangerous spot.
Right, yeah. The area that I see it pop up in my games would be like, we were playing Extinction Curse, and so there was a scene under the big top of a circus, and there was a patron who was acting a little rowdy, and one of my players, who's a great big barbarian, was like, I've had enough of this guy. I'm just going to go grab him and drag him out like he's a bouncer. Like, we're done with you. You're being ejected from the circus. And there we were having difficulty finding a rule that would allow for that kind of movement.
You could definitely make it an improvised action using the general improvised action rules, which, if I recall correctly, they say like, when in doubt, think about, is this something that you think someone should be able to like spam 3 times in a round? If so, 1 action. If not, 2 actions. Think about requiring a check that makes sense for it so that it's not an auto success. So by those rules, if you thought maybe they can't triple drag the person, then you might say, well, then it's 2 actions. Or if you thought they could, it would be 1. And the check that makes sense is probably athletics, since that's what you use to grab them in general. And the defense against it is probably fortitude, since that's the defense against grab, most likely. But you might think that it's something else in a particular situation, like if it's a staged circus fight, maybe like it goes against their circus lore, or you use circus lore or something. I don't know.
Okay.
But the point is that you can use the improvisational rules to figure out exactly how you're going to do it for that scenario. And that way also, you and the players know that if it's a little bit different the next time, the circumstances might be different too. Or maybe it only takes 1 action in another situation because it's actually easier there for a certain reason.
All right, so let's take a look at our next question here. This one has to do with familiars and the manual dexterity ability. Some clarification on what is exactly possible with a familiar who has manual dexterity. Some of the suggested questions about that were, can they feed you a potion? Can they reload your crossbow for you? And can they carry a bomb to drop on an enemy?
All right, so familiars specifically cannot activate an item or strike. So that's 2 strikes against you if you want to throw a bomb, because bomb happens to be able to have an activate entry that says activate strike.
Okay.
So they would be doing 2 things that they can't do there. A potion is also activate entry, although it's activate interact. So they're only disallowed to use potions by 1 familiar rule instead of by 2. Now, admittedly, the one about striking, I believe, was we added in errata because we accidentally didn't include it in the first printing. But that notwithstanding, they can't activate items.
Okay.
When it comes to reloading a crossbow, if they're holding the crossbow, then they probably can reload it because it's an interact action and they can take those. But normally someone can reload a crossbow that they are holding. Like, you can't like go and reload an enemy's crossbow or pull the bolts out of it, or just have a bunch of peasants standing next to you and readying actions to reload your crossbow so that you can do a full attack or anything like that. So if you have the familiar holding a crossbow, I see nothing, and I checked with Logan, we see nothing that prevents it from reloading it in the rules for familiars.
But and then you would likely still need to spend an action to pass the crossbow from the familiar back to the character.
Well, if you do it really sneakily and you have multiple crossbows, then you might be able to do it over the course of time, where like the problem with that is that then passing the multiple crossbows can wind up taking a lot of actions for you. So you wind up like, it's crossbow swap on 1 turn, reload if it's like a reload 2 weapon, I guess, like a heavy crossbow swap on the next turn. So I don't know if that's actually fast enough to do it for you or not, but you could do something like that. Because the familiar would need both actions to do the crossbow swap, which only costs you 1 action, and then it could reload on the next turn potentially, and then swap it back on the turn after.
So can they do it? Yes. Is there a real point to it? Maybe not.
You might just want to have a valet who is just pulling out already loaded crossbows for you, because a valet can grab 2 items for you per round if that's the only thing they do, and you order them. They're not doing the independent. It says you have to command them to do this. So at that point, I think you would be better. You could at least just shoot and then like release, drop it on the ground, have the familiar like drag you out, and a couple more, one for each hand or something. It depends if they're hand crossbows.
Next question, kind of in a similar vein to the last one. The limits of Mage Hand. Can you use Mage Hand to disarm a trap or pick a lock from a distance?
So the limit of Mage Hand is it says you grasp and move an object of a particular size depending on how much you've heightened Mage Hand. It doesn't do anything other than take an object and move it around. Now, it's possible you might be able to solve a puzzle with Mage Hand if the puzzle is like put the objects on the correct blocks, or else a giant blade will attack you. You could totally lift the objects and put them onto blocks and lift them off blocks to change the arrangement, all with Mage Hand, putting them on the pressure plate or whatever. But if it needs something else, like opening a lock or anything that disarming traps, any of those things, that is not something that Mage Hand can do in its description. It picks things up, it moves them around. Still very, very useful, especially if you're a clever player. And I think that puzzle example I gave is a good one.
Yeah. So I think what throws people is they think of a hand, and then they think of fingers and fine motor skills and that sort of thing. But that's not what Mage Hand is about. Mage Hand is about picking up and moving and putting down.
It's a metaphor. Yeah. Right. It's mages use this for their hand to move things, just in the same way that the Bestiary 3 fungus Wizard's Broom is not a broom, but is a fungus that cleans. Because wizards use that for their broom because they don't want to have to actually sweep things up. And then, of course, it gets as problematic as Sorcerer's Apprentice brooms if the fungus goes out of control.
All right, so our next question has to deal with battle medicine, and specifically about the cooldown of battle medicine. So does battle medicine, I know it has the same applications of treat wounds. Does it share the cooldown? So if you do battle medicine during an encounter, do you have to wait 10 minutes after the encounter before you can use regular treat wounds, or can you use treat wounds immediately after the encounter ends?
So battle medicine actually does not have quite the same application as treat wounds. It is its own action with its own once per day frequency, which is separate from the limitations on treat wounds. It is not treat wounds, and it does not have all the effects of treat wounds. For example, it does not remove the wounded condition. What it does do is it heals the same amount as treat wounds would. So that's the thing it shares with treat wounds, but it does not have any of the other things from treat wounds, including treat wounds' limit.
Another question that came up with regards to the shield spell. So if you cast the shield spell and you use it to block damage, then you cannot use the shield spell again for 10 minutes. But what if you have another way of casting the spell beyond your regular spell casting? What if you have a scroll of shield or a wand that casts shield? Could you then cast shield within that 10 minutes?
So the limitation on shield is that you cannot cast it again for 10 minutes. That's what the limit is. It doesn't matter where you're casting it from. You are the one who can't cast it. Now, if you had an intelligent item that had a thing that said, well, this item is going to cast shield and it affects the wielder of the item and the partner rather than the item itself or something like that, the item wouldn't be locked out of casting it, but you are. So shield gives a pretty big amount of block, and it locks you out of the shield spell in general. That way you don't like, oh, well, my ancestry feat and this other general feat, and these I took it and I have an occult shield and an arcane shield. Those must be different. And I have this wand, and I actually have 7 shield spells, and that way I can just use the reaction on every turn, and I still can just cast it whenever I want, or things like that. So once you've used the reaction on shield, you cannot cast it again for 10 minutes. So make sure it counts.
And one more question. This is something that has
All
come
right.
up ever since the game released because things looked a little bit differently than they did in the second edition playtest.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a +0 striking weapon valid, or do you have to have a potency rune on a weapon in order to add a striking rune?
So there's nothing in the rules of fundamental runes that prevents this from happening, or even having a major striking weapon with no potency rune. But due to the pricing and the item levels involved, it would be very rare that anyone would want to do this. The core rulebook even mentions the possibility. It says the tables here don't include progressions that aren't as likely to come up, like turning a +1 weapon directly into +1 greater striking weapon. So you can. Note also that it's the potency runes that are required to add property runes. So that's even more reason that you do not want to do this, because your +0 major striking weapon that you decided to make as a novelty item can have 0 property runes, even though it costs an arm and a leg and does have 4 basic damage dice.
Yeah, I think the only time I've seen it come up is adventuring and we find a runestone that has a striking rune on it, and all of our other weapons that the players are using are already +1 striking weapons, and you just have a non-magical weapon and you want to get some use out of that rune. Could you etch it to make it a striking weapon and then later go back to town and purchase a +1 weapon potency rune and add to it? And it sounds like you could.
You absolutely can. If you don't have a +1 sitting around and it's like, oh, well, what about that cold iron Morningstar we found? We might fight against the demon. It might as well have another die on it.
So our next question deals a little bit with the errata that came out last time that clarified what an attack roll was, especially how it pertains to applications of certain skills like of athletics. So if tripping someone and shoving someone they have the attack trait, but they're not quote unquote attack rolls, and therefore are not modified the way that attack rolls are modified. Does this mean that if someone is prone and under the prone condition, that they do not suffer any penalties to such actions like trying to shove someone while they're prone?
That is correct. They are not attack rolls. They're skill checks, and prone's penalty applies on attack rolls, but not skill checks. And so that's absolutely right. Bonuses that improve your attack rolls also don't apply. It's very important in the game that attack rolls and skill checks are distinct subsets of what checks can be. And there's something cannot be an attack roll and a skill check at the same time. It could cause like cascading problems. Like imagine if you have an ability that is similar to, if you remember one of the domains in Pathfinder First Edition that was like a vision from Lamage 2 that you pick between skill checks, attack rolls, or one other thing, and you get a bonus on one of them and a penalty on others. Like anything like that where it's like when you roll an attack roll, a blue orb surrounds you that defends you against attacks, although when you roll a skill check, instead you roll twice and take the higher, or even if it told you to roll twice and take the higher, roll twice and take the lower on the other one, you would wind up with situations where, because the game assumes these are atomic separate things, that having something that is both of them just messes everything up.
Gotcha.
So,
but this does beg a couple questions about immersion and reality. I think it's fair to say that if a person is in a prone position, they're not going to be able to shove somebody with the same force as if they were standing upright. So it's worth pointing out that as the GM, you're still empowered to apply whatever circumstance penalties you believe are appropriate. And if the scene has a character prone who is trying to shove someone and you believe that should impose a penalty, you can still apply that penalty.
I think you're definitely right.
Yeah.
Like prone also doesn't say that you get a penalty to using a spinning wheel, but it probably is hard.
Yeah.
From the ground to use a spinning wheel. In my game, I might give you a penalty on using a spinning wheel if you're prone. Or like that's just a random skill check, right? But there are a variety of skill checks, like I don't know, if you're trying to use an intimidation check to like give an intimidating speech to your army of barbarians, and somebody tripped you and you're just lying on the ground in pain,
Yeah.
being like, look how strong I am on the ground in pain. Like that also might be harder from prone.
Sure. Yeah, so the bottom line is raw is where the conversation on mechanics begins, not where it ends. As a GM, you can apply whatever bonuses and penalties you still believe are appropriate. So there you have it. As always, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank everyone who supports this channel by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, subscribing to the Patreon, leaving comments, sharing the videos with your friends. Everything the community does to support me is greatly appreciated. And with that, thanks for watching, take care, and happy gaming.